Hello every guppy, my name is Pisces and I'm a professional Dead by Daylight coach on Fiverr. I have been coaching DBD for over 2.5 years now, and I currently have a flawless record of over 160 reviews, all of which are 5 stars. And I want to welcome you to my Timeless Guide to DBD series. The goal of this series is to provide you with the greatest possible foundation to build off of when it comes to learning DBD and playing it. Even if you have hundreds or thousands of hours in DBD, this series will likely reshape how you play or understand the game in some way. For the first installment of the series, I'm going to be breaking down the fundamentals of camera positioning. Not only will you learn when to turn your camera in chase, but also how, because I'm going to break down the fundamentals of your input device and teach you how to gather info like a pro, whether you're keyboard and mouse or controller. And just to be clear, the difference between keyboard and mouse and controller is almost completely irrelevant. I personally can loop with near perfect efficiency even on mobile, and I have even played the game with one hand and still path properly and look back in chase. So truly I tell you, if you're comfortable with your device and you understand it, you can loop like the best of the best. Alright, so without further ado, let's get right into it. In Dead by Daylight, our characters move in relation to the direction of our camera. So if we hold down the left key, our character is going to move to the left of the screen. So when it comes to camera placement, your camera serves two purposes in chase: to see your options and surroundings, and to gain info on the killer. Almost everyone is able to look forward in chase and observe their surroundings ahead of them, but if you clicked on this video, looking back is likely the issue. But I think it's actually more appropriate to say that looking around is the issue, because looking straight back is actually almost never what you're supposed to be doing. However, it is more often correct to look generally backwards at an angle, or even sometimes just looking sideways. Now before we go too in depth on that, let's break down the fundamentals of the input devices that you use. Even if I don't talk about your input device first, do not skip ahead, because the tips I go over here I have had to teach people with thousands of hours, and everything about looping hinges on how well you can control your character and your camera with your device. So firstly, let's start with keyboard and mouse. Keyboard has the advantage of perfect directional inputs. The WASD movement keys allow for straight line inputs, either forward, backwards, left, or right, without any human error. You push the button down, you go in that direction. However, the downside with keyboard and mouse is that they are only capable of moving in increments of 45 degrees. So W is forward, D is the right. So if you combine those, forward and right, that's diagonally to the right. That's 45 degrees. Same with any other combination of two keys. 45-degree increments each change. That means you cannot turn sharper than 45 degrees without using your mouse. Okay, now this next part is the most crucial. If you want to run a perfectly straight path and still turn your camera, you're going to need to adjust your camera instantly by 45-degree increments for each movement key change. So if I want to keep running in one direction, but I want to look behind me, I'm going to have to turn my camera to turn behind me, yes? So if I want to look back in chase, I'm going to have to adjust my movement opposite to my camera. So if I turn my camera 45 degrees to the right, I'm going to swap a key 45 degrees left, and that'll cancel out and keep me moving straight. You add this for each increment of 45 degrees you turn your camera, and then you'll be able to keep running in a straight line. So let me give you an example of this. If I'm going to be running forward and I want to look back, I'm going to hold W. I'm going to swap the WA, turn my camera to the right, A, turn it to the right, SA, turn it to the right, and guess what, S, turn it to the right again. And each time I turn it to the right, we're going to be turning it 45 degrees, because that is the difference in movement with our keyboard, and that's going to keep us running straight. With this in mind, it's time for the coolest trick you can do with keyboard and mouse. So if you want to be able to switch from looking forward to backwards instantly and easily, you can actually do this with one finger. So if when you're running, you hold diagonally forward, so WA or WD, because that's going to be forward and diagonal, all you need to do is take your finger off W and put it on S. And thus, that's going to result in a 90-degree change with your movement, right? So you went from going forward to the right to going backward to the right, or you went forward left, backwards left. That's a 90-degree change. So what we'll do is we're going to flick our camera 90 degrees. And so all we did to look back with keyboard and mouse was go from WA to SA, flick the camera 90 degrees, boom. Immediate change with no messing up of our movement at all. This is an absolutely crucial way to look back without messing up your movement. It's super helpful. I use it constantly. I also took this same concept and understanding of movement with keyboard and mouse and actually applied that to my one-handed DBD video, where I actually just basically made my mouse buttons my WASD, and so all I did whenever I changed these movements is flick my camera 45 degrees and boom, it's the same stuff. So here are some examples of me moving my camera back and forth in a standard chase. I want you to imagine what keys I'm pushing or what direction my character is going to be moving in on my screen, right? It is important to be able to see this, because you can use this knowledge to look at your favorite content creators' movements and replicate them for yourself. So now let's address curved movement. There are many situations where you need to turn your character in a curved fashion, and for keyboard and mouse, this is actually quite simple. When you're running your loops, you're going to be moving the same movement key the whole time. There's going to be no key swapping throughout this stage. All you're going to do is turn your camera. Notice how my character is always moving towards the same part of my screen, which means I'm holding the same movement key, right? Because they're moving to that side on my screen the whole time. I'm just simply holding it down, and I'm using my camera to make the curved movements to steer around the loop. In this situation, since we can see the killer the whole time while doing this, it is perfectly okay to do this because we can see the killer, and we're also seeing our surroundings enough to be able to run around the loop without bumping into anything. So we follow our 2 rules of our camera, which is get information on the killer and get information on our surroundings. And we're pathing great. And we're going to go over more about pathing in the next video. So don't worry about that too much, but it is very important you learn this. All right, controller players, it is your turn. So I'm actually going to go ahead and change your life with what I'm about to tell you, because this is very controversial, I'm sure, for everyone else you've heard from. But high sensitivity on Survivor is actually almost always worse or either completely unnecessary than low sensitivity. Every single controller player I have coached, we have lowered their sensitivity, and it has changed their looping forever. And so here's why I say that. When it comes to looping, you rarely need to make massive instantaneous adjustments of your camera. All high sensitivity does is make your movement jagged and less accurate, and in Dead by Daylight, all that matters is pathing perfectly when you're in your chase and just getting the information with your camera. And luckily in chase, naturally, you almost never need to instantly quickly look back. The only information that you would ever really need to instantly look back for may be against a nurse or huntress if you really want to instantly see if they're pulling their hatchet back, but even then I still find that irrelevant. So with all that in mind, I'll tell you my recommended sensitivity is actually 25 to 45% for one very crucial reason. It is the flawless turn speed to actually turn around corners easily in loops with your character. If you hold down your camera to spin perfectly sideways, so imagine at this sensitivity I'm holding my camera and it's going sideways, spinning at the same speed. You see that, right? So there's no need to tab the analog stick for tiny little increments or barely hold it down to turn the right speed. You can actually hold the analog all the way down and you'll get the perfect speed to turn around corners, which will make your pathing and chase super efficient. Also, if you use your camera to turn corners, you gather information on the killer the last second before you lose vision of them. You see that? This is going to be very relevant later. This is why I didn't want you to skip. If you're a keyboard and mouse player and you skipped, you're going to miss this. Also, if you're trying to run a straight line and look back, it's not as complicated as keyboard and mouse. You don't have to lock your camera in these increments. There's no need to quickly flick your camera. You just turn your camera analog sideways and adjust your movement analog gradually at the same time to cleanly run in that straight line. All right, so now that we understand how to use our input devices properly, let's transition to the loops. When you're looping as Survivor, it's important to know you're playing with a reactive mindset. Therefore, placing your camera optimally around corners, over props, and generally behind you allows you to make an educated decision based on the killer's movement and the killer's choices. Once you gather that info, then you can look forward briefly if needed, or continuously sideways, looking around, generally backwards, generally forwards, depending on the situation. In instances where you're looping around props that are short, typically you want to have your camera pointed a little bit downward so you can see over the props. That's a very basic tip. Then you'll have your movement generally just directly sideways relative to your camera. So you're just going to be holding down to the side. Now, so here's what that looks like. So notice how I never look forward because my camera is already fulfilling both requirements. I observe my props in my path. I know that the props are coming up beside me because I can see them approach, or I very recently see them before I approach them, so I know how to path around them. Also, I can see the killer, and I can see the palette and window or whatever my option is, so I have all the information I need. I see my surroundings, I know my options, and I see the killer. This is perfect. All right, so that's simple enough. So how about when we're in loops or prompts that are too tall to see over? This is where things are a little bit more complicated, and I can tell you the fundamentals of this right now. So I'm going to demonstrate this at the loop called the LT, informally known as TL if your name is Psychojund. This loop is on almost every map in the game and is truly the most fundamental loop in the whole game. I spend over half my sessions at this loop or related to this loop because it is actually just so efficient at teaching the entire game. So anyway, you're just going to see a lot of this in the future episodes, so let's get right to it. So at the LT, we cannot see over the walls. So what's going to happen is we're going to have our camera placed in specific situations. And what's cool about the LT is if you actually have perfect camera positioning, pathing, and you react properly and all that stuff, and you know what to do at your loops, you can actually literally be invincible to every single mind game in the game except for one. So when running at the LT or any loop, you'll naturally end up in this situation where you just vaulted a window, right? You just made your distance with your loop option, which is a palette or window, and now you're here. You have to react to the killer. Again, you play reactively with your camera and in chase. So notice how I'm moving opposite to the killer. I'm keeping an eye on him until he moves far enough around the corner when I need to run. When I move back and forth around this loop, notice how I'm moving side to side with my movement keys and keeping my camera through the window because my camera needs to be there for that information. And so by the way, like I said, there's a lot of pathing and positioning related things going on right now throughout these chases you're going to be seeing the rest of the video, but don't mind that. Right now we're just learning camera. We're going to learn that stuff in the next episodes, okay? Alright, we see the killer and this is good, but the killer has made a move now, so it's time to react. He has committed to us in this direction, so we have decided to, of course, run the other way. And right now we're trying to make it to our closest window, which is right around the corner. So notice at this point, no matter where we look, we cannot see the killer over the wall. So what do? We're going to have to actually turn our camera diagonally backwards, not directly backwards. And there's 3 reasons for this. Reason number 1, our last bit of information we received from the killer was that they were behind us, so we want to keep our camera back enough to potentially see any information of the killer still being behind us. This is Red Stain approaching, will we see his body approach? We're just going to keep our camera locked here for that reason. That's information, right? We need our killer information. Reason number 2, since we recently saw the end of the wall we plan to run around in just a second, we have a general idea of how close it is, and even if we don't see exactly where it is right now, since we're looking diagonally backwards, we'll see it approach us since we're in third person before we'll need to turn around it, so we can just wait and react. Once the corner's there, we just round the corner with that trick I told you about just turning your camera to turn the corner. The third and final reason we're looking diagonally backwards is so we can see around the corner when we approach it. Since we're looking diagonally backwards, we're going to see around the corner sooner and gain information that we lost during that moment of blindness we couldn't see over the loop. Notice how if I look directly back, I couldn't see around the corner, nor see when the corner was approached, so I couldn't path around it perfectly to get to my window as quickly as possible. Now notice if I look directly sideways, I won't see if the killer is coming through the window or directly behind me, so he could show up from either of those places and I would not have enough information to know that. Also notice, if we were to run forward this whole time, which is an absolute almost never do this, if you were to run forward, especially when you're turning around the corner, we're not going to see the killer until we're in his face and we don't see behind us, so we gain absolutely 0 information while running forward in our chase. So this is absolutely just never just hold forward in your chase, please. If any of you learned from this video, please don't hold forward in chase.